Good afternoon and welcome to Me Talk Pretty, a quick guide for effective communication in the workplace. First off, who am I? Well, my name is Marsh. I'm the principal of the Marsh Group. The Marsh Group specializes in training assessment, development, and facilitation, as well as leadership and team coaching. You see on here I've got my sentence is, he gave people wings. In Daniel Pink's book, Drive, he says that every person has a sentence. Now, our sentence is the lasting legacy that we want to leave behind. And so my sentence that I use is, he gave people wings. And so I hope that through my teaching, through facilitation, that I give you wings to fly and go forth and teach others and to be more effective in the workplace. Now, communication. In fast-growing organizations, communication is easily overlooked. But the ability to communicate is imperative in these organizations because we use communication, we use effective communication to get our vision and mission across. And for fast-growing or smaller startup organizations, that is very, very important. Without effective communication, the system breaks down, as we see here. And there's no way to express the thoughts, ideas, and feelings within the organization. So the bottom line is this: in a leadership position, if you're a good communicator, you'll have a better chance of success. You'll be able to persuade people, you'll influence others, and you'll provide effective feedback to your team. And that's the way to keep the organization growing and the best way to make the organization a success. Now, communication is a two-way process. It starts with the sender creating a message, and they convey that message either through words, through speech, through writing, through hand gestures, body language, whatever, but the sender starts the process. The second part of communication is that the receiver must effectively interpret the message that was created by the sender. And so the receiver then will interpret that message, decide what it means, and then they can become the sender and create a new message and send that back. And so this is a circular process that, when it works well, effective communication takes place. But in order for effective communication to take place, both the sender and the receiver have to be on the same page. They have to interpret that message the exact same way. Simple, right? Well, unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way. That's why there's a lot of times there's not effective communication in the workplace. In fact, George Bernard Shaw said the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And that's true. As a sender, I believe that you've received my message the way that I meant for you to receive it. However, you interpret my message a different way than I meant. And so we both thought communication took place, but then in the end we find out that the system breaks down. In fact, studies show that 70% of workplace mistakes are a direct result of poor communication. So communication in the workplace is very, very important. And it's not just communication. Again, it's effective communication in the workplace is important. So today, we're going to discuss the importance of effective communication, which we just went through. We'll also determine our communication style. And then finally, we're going to apply our communication style learning by trying to work out what the communication style of our neighbor is. And that's the way that we'll communicate with each other. So let's talk about communication style first. Everyone has a style that they use to communicate. Just like everyone has a different personality, everyone has a different communication style. Now, there are 4 types of communication that we're going to talk about. The first is verbal. Verbal communication, those are the words that we use. That's the words we use when we're speaking to other people. That's the words that we use when we're writing to other people. And so the actual words we use are the verbal. The second type of communication is the paraverbal. Paraverbal is the way we say those words. So that could be the inflection in our voice. So we could say, I'm having fun. So our verbal says that we're having fun, but the paraverbal, the way that we say it, doesn't indicate that we're having fun. And so there's conflict in those two styles of communication. And when there's conflict, there's not effective communication. Now the third type of communication, the third type of communication is body language. That's how we stand, that's how we hold ourselves. For example, if you see someone that is standing in front of a room like this, what does that typically mean? Yes, it usually means that you're closed off. That's how people interpret that. Now, it may just mean that I'm comfortable standing this way. But to others, it's interpreted, to the receivers, it can be interpreted as standoffish or a wall. And so we've got to be aware of our body language at all times. If we're standing in front of a room like this, what does that usually indicate? Yes, it usually indicates that we're open, that we're welcoming, we're accepting of people, we're accepting of you and your message. So body language is another type of communication that's very important that we use within our communication style. And then finally, there's personal space. Now, by personal space, I don't mean what we typically think of, how close you stand to another person, but I'm talking about the space around us with where we work or where we live, where we play. So, for example, personal space in this conversation will mean our office. And so we're going to look at what a person has in their office. That is the personal space. There are different things that a person can have hanging on the walls, have sitting on their desk, or not have sitting on their desk that will play into the personal space. So any questions about the types of communication? Because each communication style, we're going to discuss the type of communication and how that style uses that type of communication. So now let's do a quick assessment of what's your communication style. We're going to take 5 minutes, and in the packets that you received when you checked in, there is this assessment sheet. It's very short. You will read in the first column, you will read the statement, and then across you will check which one of these is most like you most of the time. It's not going to be 100% of the time, but what is most like you most of the time. And at the end, you will add up the check marks within each column and write those numbers at the bottom. And then at the end, we will discuss what these numbers mean and what the words listener, energizer, performer, and thinker mean. So go ahead and take 5 minutes to fill this out, and then we'll reconvene. All right, is everyone finished? You're all finished? Good. Well, now let's talk about the communication style. Don't share your results yet. We're still got an activity to go around that. But let's go through and see how much you agree with your communication style. Now remember, when we're talking about communication style, not everything within your style is going to apply to you. So don't think I'm trying to pigeonhole you in. But in general, when we go through these styles, these characteristics are going to be true of the overall population. So the first one that we're going to talk about is the listener. Now, the characteristics of a listener is they tend to be people-oriented, and because of that, they can be slow to make decisions. And they don't delegate very well because they don't want to think they're imposing on someone else. Remember, they're people-oriented, and so they don't want to think they're imposing on you by giving you something to do. And so those are the main characteristics of a listener. Now let's go through each of the types of communication as it pertains to a listener. The listener's verbal is they tend to listen. It's right there in the name, listeners. So they listen. They don't talk as much, but when they do, they use very close personal language. They will talk in a low tone of voice, and they'll be very close to you. They tend to use first names. And they tend to tell you it's going to be okay. Everything's okay. That was fine that you did that. And they use very supportive language. Everything's good. Now the paraverbal, they'll speak slowly in soft tones, but have very patient speech. Because remember, they're people oriented. And so they're going to be very patient with you. Body language, they'll have slow movement. They like to hug, and they have a very gentle handshake. They don't have the firm handshake. Very gentle. And then their personal space, remember this is their office that we're going to talk about, but there'll be a lot of family pictures in their workspace, and they like side-by-side seating. They're not a fan of in the round. They like to sit more classroom style, and they tend to carry sentimental objects. They may have photos on their key ring, or they may have something on their key ring that reminds them of their father or their mother or their brother or the sister or their son or their daughter. And so that is the listener. Now, listeners tend to conflict with performers. We'll talk about more about that in a minute. When we get to performer, I think you'll see why there's conflict between listeners and performers. So any questions about listeners? All right, let's move to our next activity. This is Which Style is My Neighbor? So what I want to do, each one of you took this communication style worksheet, this assessment. You've determined your communication style. And now what I want to do is we're going to go around the room, and first off, I'm going to have you decide which style you think I am. Am I a listener, an energizer, a performer, and a thinker? And before you think you can just guess, think again. When you give me an answer, you're going to have to state why you think which one you think I am. So, which style do you think I am?